Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone in Subro land. This is Brett Tishler, a partner at White & Williams in Philadelphia, and we're here to present part two of our Workers' Compensation Subrogation Tales by the Water Cooler. Part two, we got a new claim, now what? Presenting with me is Big Mike Abed, Mr. Lunchbox himself. Mike?
Good morning, everybody.
I love those dulcet, silvery tones.
Oh, Brett, you're too kind.
You have a face made for radio.
I do, in fact.
But welcome back. Hopefully you heard part one of our podcast, How to Handle a Case, aka what are we getting ourselves into? We were getting ready, if you recall, we were getting ready to discuss how to handle a case. And now, geez, it's already December. Can you believe that? It's December. We're going to be getting into the holidays.
This year flew. I don't even want to talk about it.
But we were getting ready to discuss how to handle a case when we were pleasantly surprised with guest host Robert Michael Caplan. And here comes the shameless promotion, head of the largest workers' compensation subrogation unit in the country. Rob had a new loss that just came in and he wanted to discuss it. So we thought, why not do it on the air?
Listen in as we address what the case is and what we need to do to figure out if there is any potential theory to pursue to get a recovery.
So, Rob, say hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad I can be here. We have a new Oklahoma case where a worker got his foot traumatically amputated in a sump hole.
These are the kinds of things we hear.
The one in my basement, like my sump pump?
Well, you know
what? For the benefit of our listeners, Rob, can you just explain this a bit further for Mike? Because I got to be honest, the first time I had one of these losses, I thought the same thing.
What? That a sump was a pump and not a hole?
All I could think of was that thing in the basement that keeps the water from flooding my basement.
Yeah, well, truth be told, I thought that too. I got my first sump hole amputation case probably a good 20 years ago. And since then, I've had at least a dozen of them. And amazingly, they're all the same. They all have a 19-year-old worker who sticks his foot into an open hole and loses a foot or a leg. But it's not with a sump pump. It's with a sump hole. And what a sump hole is basically it's an open hole in a cement floor that usually has a grain bin or some other bin that is usually part of farming equipment. And it is typically not guarded. There's no cover over it. And the reason that the hole is in the floor is, if you can imagine, if you're driving through any farmland in the Midwest or central Pennsylvania, you'll see these giant grain bins. But inside them, they have this flat floor, cement or steel floor, and they need to fill those grain bins from the top. You'll see a grain leg going up. The grain will go up in the top, and they'll fill the grain. They'll fill the bins. And they need to unload those bins, and the way they do it is by gravity. And the gravity takes the grain through these open sump holes. What many people don't know is that about 12 inches below these open sump holes, these holes are typically about 24 inches by 24 inches. Sometimes they're a little bit bigger, but typically 24 inches by 24 inches square. And about 12 inches below the surface is a moving auger, a rotating auger. It looks like a big corkscrew that conveys the grain. Sometimes there's a moving conveyor belt also that conveys the grain as the grain flows by gravity, and the conveyor or auger takes it off-site where a waiting truck is to take it away to the market. Now, here's the problem, which most people don't know about. So the grain bins are filled, but as they are emptied and the grain gets lower and lower and lower in the bin, it doesn't just neatly go into the hole. Usually it comes down in a V shape, and grain gets stuck on the sides. And a person usually has to go in through a door that's cut into the side of the bin.
Which is the only light in these things, by the way.
Right.
So picture this pitch black with one little hole when you open the door. Mike's staring at us with the widest eyes.
This sounds horrible. This does not sound
well. It's low man on the totem pole. That's why I say it's usually a teenager who's given this task to go in with a broom, sometimes a shovel, into this dark, dingy, very slippery environment. And it's usually hot. It smells terrible. And they have to get down into the grain onto the floor, and they have to knock the grain that's stuck on the walls onto the floor. And sometimes there's what's called a sweep auger, which will sweep the grain from the sides into these holes. But sometimes they don't have a sweep auger, and the person who is given this task has to actually sweep the grain themselves into these holes.
Or even
Now,
if they do have a sweep auger, it doesn't get everything, which is why you got these guys with a big push broom sweeping it into the sump hole themselves.
sometimes there's a single sump hole, but usually there's multiple holes across the floor in a line. Invariably, what we've seen in these accidents is the sump holes do not have covers on them. They are literally open. The only thing that you'll see if you look at them is an open 24 by 24 foot hole, which amazingly fits a worker's foot perfectly. And then you'll see what's below that spinning auger. And the reason that the auger remains spinning is that these people have to go into the grain bins multiple times. It's not like they can just go in and clear the grain off the wall and be done with it. They got to go in multiple times because this is an occurrence that happens all the time.
So so obviously we got a guy, in these losses, and probably the loss that we're talking about now. He's out there, he's sweeping the grain in, and he's not looking, he's not paying attention, or he doesn't even see the hole to begin with because it's so dark, and his foot walks in and he gets an amputation. What's the general theory in these types of cases?
The theory is that it is incredibly simple and cost efficient to put a guard, just a simple, whether it's a couple of pieces of rebar in the concrete floor or a simple cover guard over these holes, that prevents the problem.
Now let me ask you though. I've seen the defense what they argue, and they argue, well, it's going to clump. The grain's going to clump. It's not going to fit in. It's going to bridge. That's what they call bridging.
Right. Well, typically, and it depends on the type of grain that's going through, whether it's corn or barley or wheat or whatever that's coming through, that is a potential. However, what we've found and our experts have seen through feasibility tests is that more likely than not, you're not going to have that problem. Okay, the grain's going to flow through because rebar is round, and any type of round guard is going to allow whatever you have to flow freely through it, especially if it's put into the concrete. And if it's done at inception in the design process of the concrete, the rebar is put about 6 inches down, and you don't have that clumping problem.
Right?
Well, in the case of this Oklahoma loss, when did our worker lose his foot?
Yeah. When did this happen?
Well, everything comes in through our electronic referrals, and I'm looking at it, and it happened yesterday, so it's a recent loss.
So listener, just so you know, the way we handle our incoming losses at White and Williams, there's an electronic portal, and obviously our clients call us up all the time and talk about potential new cases. But also there's this electronic referral form where they submit all of the required information we need to get a claim started, which is what generates in front of my computer, in front of Rob's computer. And then he prints up what that referral sheet, which is what he's looking at now. And we can talk about the facts. So right now we know that this guy got a traumatic amputation from a sump hole, and it happened yesterday. Rob, do we know what the status of the loss site is?
We know some facts, not everything, but we know that it's been locked down since the accident. Nobody's touched the site, but apparently the bin is old, ancient. It might even be very old. However, there's some good news. There may be outside maintenance companies who provided safety inspections for the insured's entire premises. Regardless, though, the employer needs to clean everything up because it's one of a few bins, and they got to keep their business moving. And it's harvest season, so they need to fill up the bin with grain within the next week.
Now, Rob, if I remember correctly, I think Oklahoma has a 10-year statute of repose. That means if the grain bins are over 10 years old, we likely can't pursue the original manufacturer or the builder of the grain silo. Isn't this just a quick closer then?
No, wait a sec, Mike. Rob mentioned that there was a third-party safety company. I agree. There is a statute of repose, and if nothing else happened, we might be out of the water. But he did mention a third-party safety company. We might be able to go after the company if they failed to note the sump was unguarded, if that was some of the things that they were supposed to be looking at.
Very good comment, Grasshopper. You're learning after a few years. It's good. But not only that, I mean, there's a potential theory against a third-party company, and we should absolutely document the condition of the silo because there could be other factors. I mean, this could be a newer silo they don't know about. There could have been a storm. They had to replace the silo. And before any changes are made, we got to go out and document that.
How big is the loss? Do we know?
It's going to be a big loss. Remember, and this is important, amputated foot up to the knee, that's going to be a big loss. And that means we're going to assign it probably to either me or you.
What does it matter anyway? We both know I'm doing the work.
I just got a great idea, Rob. We should assign it to me, and I'll have Mike assist.
Attaboy. Done.
Mike.
Guys have been here the whole time.
How could we have missed you? Isn't it time for lunch, Mike? Oh.
Hopefully.
Well, and you heard everything that we have here. So let's talk. Rob, what's the next thing we need to do?
Well, in a case like this, we have our theories. We've seen this before, but we're not allowed to testify. So we need to discuss hiring an expert.
Exactly. You know what? And when we're hiring an expert, we have to make a decision. I mean, ideally, we want to hire this specific expert that has background experience in these types of losses and not the jack of all trades expert.
What do you mean by that?
The jack of all trades expert is, and everyone knows this, whether you're an insurance professional, an attorney, whatever, there's always that one firm sending out saying, I can do everything. I'm a mechanical engineer with fire experience. I'm an electrical engineer with some mechanical engineering experience. I've done house fires. I've done boat fires. I've done water losses. I've done mold intrusion. I'm your guy. That's probably not the guy that we want if we can avoid it, because we want somebody who specializes in a loss. I'm thinking with this type of loss, I'd like to have a mechanical engineer with a background in agricultural equipment.
Okay, so if a guy is a mechanical engineer and he looks at like small appliances like toasters, that's not the guy we want for this, right?
Probably not. I want a guy who knows what a grain bin is and how it works and how it functions and what a sump is, not a guy who thinks he's going to be seeing a water loss in my basement.
All right, perfect. I'm thinking we should also get this site laser scan.
Now, I haven't done a lot of those. Aren't they expensive?
Well, that's a good point, but they used to be. They're not expensive anymore. Let me tell you a little bit about laser scanning. So laser scanning, if you and I think Brett knows this because he's been around a long time now. It used to be almost prohibitively expensive.
They used to bring out these big tripods to get it done. It was a separate company that would do it. Usually the experts would have to hire another company. And they came out with these big giant tripods with these big styrofoam balls, and then they had to put markers all over. And it would take all day.
Yeah, now the equipment's much smaller. It's still a laser scanner on a tripod, but they don't have to have points of reference anymore all over the place. And as a matter of fact, now they can do the inside of a grain silo, they can do the outside, and then you get a 3D digital picture that's memorialized forever. And especially in a case like this, where we want to have boots on the ground quickly, we might not have a target yet to put on notice. We will have a digital footprint, especially in a situation where the insured or employer in this case wants to get back to work quickly. And maybe what some people may say spoliate the scene. We will have a digital footprint through a laser scan for everyone to see of exactly how the accident scene looked like at the time of the accident.
All right, roger that. I'll get a cross projection from them then. I'm guessing I got to go in person?
Well,
Sunny, Oklahoma?
I guess that it really depends. Ideally, it's a big loss. Probably being in person is the way to go. But let's talk about the pros and cons of it. If you call up and you speak with the insured and we find out that only Mary Smith, the HR person who has no idea about anything, is going to be there, and all she's going to do is let our expert look at the grain bin and do his laser scan, might not be worthwhile for you to go. But if we can confirm that there's going to be witnesses there, there's going to be documents we can get, there's going to be people we can speak to, there's going to be other things, absolutely you should go there, no doubt.
And I'm thinking, with the size of a loss like this, if we can make sure that there's going to be somebody from the insured, you're probably going to want to go because you're also going to want to ask for documents, contract documents, insurance documents. I mentioned, we've had several cases where silos have been blown down by either tornadoes or derechos. You may have heard in the Midwest, they've had derechos, and they had to replace with an insurance claim. You can get great information on the designers of these silos and the pads and all the equipment inside through the insurance claim information and the original purchase information. And you know what? Sometimes you can't get that over the phone or through an email. But being there in person, they have a level of trust with you, and that's gold.
And also having, especially if you've never been to this type of loss before, for your own edification, so you, when handling the case, know what you're looking at. You know it. That's the best way to do it, is have boots on the ground. Not in the sump hole, but boots on the ground.
And also, last but not least, for adverse target notice purposes. A lot of times our insureds don't always know how to look for a serial plate, look for a manufacturing ID number. That's where you come in and our expert comes in, and we can get people on notice more quickly that way.
So we're running out of time right now, but I mean, there's so much more to talk about. We didn't even touch on placing potential adverse parties on notice or any of that stuff.
I did that.
Well, excuse me, Mr. Caplan.
You got to be careful with it.
So to sum it all up, there are a lot of things to think about when we get a new workers' comp subrogation loss. The pertinent information are the facts, expert retention, that is, getting the right expert at the right price, scope of the initial investigation, speaking with the insured, gathering critical evidence, placing potential adverse parties on notice. So many things. Michael, is there anything else we need to address? Anything you see in the contact sheet?
Yeah. Turns out the benefits are being issued under Arkansas law, where the worker apparently lives. He used to drive to the insured's Oklahoma facility. That going to be a problem?
Well, I guess we'll have to do a podcast on made whole states and conflict of law analysis, but fortunately, that's all the time we have here today. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Subro Sessions. Be sure to listen to the next episode of Subro Sessions, which will be released on the third Tuesday of next month. In this case, January 16th. You can find past episodes of the podcast and relevant case updates on the Subrogation Strategist blog, all available at whiteandwilliams.com.
We would like to remind everyone that the contents of this podcast should not be construed as legal advice or to give a legal opinion on any specific facts or circumstances. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. The contents of this podcast are intended for general informational purposes only, and you are urged to consult a lawyer concerning your own situation with any specific legal question you may have.